All right, then hello everyone. Welcome to the very first virtual community meetup ever, I think, especially in that size now. Yeah, and since we cannot meet in person these days that easy anymore, we wanted to not just reach Berlin or Germany, but basically everyone who's currently awake and wants to be part of our online meetup tonight. So very quickly about me. Most of you probably know me. I'm a senior developer in Spryker, at Spryker, and also a tooling architect. So my job is a lot around all kinds of automation processes. And so many things that I do go around web-based kind of tooling. And so I also have to I have to contribute to Cake once in a while, actually quite a bit. And so as a core developer, I've probably been doing that for about 10 years, more or less, more so without being part of the core. And yeah, having to do a lot around these kind of tooling and automation topics. I have quite a few plugins and reusable code pieces that yeah, are out there also for others to be used. And once in a while, I'm a meetup organizer, like tonight. Yeah, and I do have some co-hosts tonight. One is already present, which is Michael. Michael Hoffman, maybe you want to say something about you as well?
Yeah, I have something in my slide later. So for the moment,
okay,
just
cool.
hello and
Perfect.
speak to you later.
Good. Yeah, let's see about what we want to dive in today. Did something happen with my other slide? What's the agenda? Where did the agenda go to? Huh. Oh, how did that happen? Completely mangled up here. Anyway, präsentieren. So. The agenda for today is basically a CakePHP 4.1 preview. So sometime this summer, we want to release a stable, and it's going to be quite a few improvements during the 4.x lifecycle. So why not showcasing already some of the useful stuff from there? Most of them are already true anyways in the 4.0 release. When I'm doing that, I could also go a little bit more into some of the basic functionality of Cake. So if there are any people that are really new to it and have not really seen a lot and want to have a little bit more demo showcasing, that would be possible. For that, maybe you can, like, I don't know, raise your hand if you want to see a little bit more basics at the very beginning, just a few minutes. Okay, so far I think I see one hand, two hands, 3, 5, okay, 6, 7. Who's betting more? Okay, well, we're at 10 now. We can should certainly do that. Then I want to dive into one of my plugins, which is the IdeHelper. A very important tool if you use PHP Storm, but even without, it can be very useful to really speed up your own development in CakePHP. So that would be one of the main topics. Then Michael will talk about the authentication plugin. So the new way of authentication in Cake. And then there's another guest speaker talking about Fixture Factories. That will definitely be after the break, because we're going to do a break after the first hour. And so I will go into more details about the lightning talks and afterwards, the presentations after the pause. Cool. So in 4.1, there will be quite a few improvements to the ORM. In fact, if you open up the diff of current 4.0 to 4.1, you will actually see that half of the code changes are around the ORM improvements and all kinds of enhancements that have been built there. There is a huge debug, a DD improvement built in now in the 4.1 version, thanks to Mark's story. I can show that in a second. We have a new after Marshall event that helps to set error messages into the entity before it's actually stored, before it's before the saving continues, so to speak. Because in before save, you shouldn't really interact with the event anymore. It's not really reliable. So I can also show an example to that if you want to. Then there's quite a bit more around the route path handling improvements. So we can now use string route paths everywhere in the system with 4.1, and it's really fast. And if you combine that with the IdeHelper, you have incredible speed in building URLs, like basically just selecting from a available list, so to speak. I will also showcase that later. So I can go into the sandbox. What did I want to show? Let's start with a DD. Yeah. So we want to go into the sandbox. Okay. So let's show the DD function. When we are in the old version, which is Cake 4.0, and we could just go to any controller. Let's go to, I don't know, is there an overview? I guess there is. We can also go here, export, and we DD the countries. So we want to try to debug what is returned here in this. And let's just imagine this is an array of entities, which it is. So basically, yeah, an array of entities. Then let's go back and go to the export. What did we do? Countries. Okay. Countries. So in this case, you can see that it's like the normal way, but you have very limited options of actually interfering with this. Like it's not so nice to work with. And if you have nested entities, it's really hard to see what the really type of those entities is. If we go now into a test demo site that I created, which I just called repositories local, because we can play a little bit with like some packages and branches later. Then I can just debug, for example, inside of branches. Yeah, this list, for example, of branches. So I go in, branches controller, and inside I also have to do to array to see the same thing. DD branches. Let's see what happens. So that should be the 4.1 version, is that right? I thought it's anyway the 4.1 version. Yeah, it's 4.1. I think it is on debug yet because DD is still overwritten by Symfony. So we have to use actually DD debug. Yeah, now it's the new one. That's what I wanted to show. Because here you have now a better way of accessing all of those lower ones. You can actually deep dive into those. And before this wasn't really possible. So it's way nicer now to interact. I can show the other one, the actual other one, because as I said, I was wrong. It's not DD, but it's debug right now. So let's go back and let's compare this one to the old way. This is, I think, the Symfony debugger here. That's a different topic. Yeah, this is the old way. And it can be huge if you don't limit it. And if it's nested, you cannot really properly navigate. And from what I remember, this should even have, yeah, some kind of basic search functionality. Yeah, but anyway, this is how the new debug is going to look like. It doesn't transform any entities into arrays as it did before in Cake 4.0, but it will actually keep the actual class names intact. So the output is way more reliable right now. Okay. The route path handling and all that stuff I will show later because then it makes more sense. And that means we can now dive into the first topic. Was there any questions here? Okay, it's solved. Any questions so far? Or can we continue?
There were some random questions. There was one if we also bring the new debug format to DD. I think so.
As soon as we figure out how we can disable the Symfony injection of DD, yes.
Yeah. Then we had some more generic question we might can save for later.
Okay.
And there was one question about how to create a app default app template with 4.1. And I would suggest that you simply clone the app repo and change the composer CakePHP dependency to dev master.
Yeah.
That should do the trick. Currently, we don't have a branch in the app repo which points to dev master.
True. Exactly. I promised to do a little bit of like basic showcasing of how a Cake app works. So before I go into the IDE helper now, I can do that very quickly. So I do have a Vagrant system. So you can use Docker as well, but I use a Vagrant system and I have 2 versions up and running. So I have my sandbox, which is still 4.0. Now you can see that by using this. And usually the commands won't differ too much. So if you just look into those, I think I can even just do that because I have an alias intact. So the commands are pretty much similar in a way. We have all the big commands that are very interesting. And we can also try some of them out, of course. In my case, I have a demo prepared because if we go back to the repositories and remove this, I prepared a demo with like packages, then packages have branches, and then every package also has releases, right? But if we click on releases, boom, it doesn't exist yet. It's weird that I can't click this. Okay, now I should be able to click this. That's the sandbox. Yeah, that's the one. So here we have already releases prepared, which is just a table. And this table just contains a few fields, so nothing too magic about it. But the code doesn't exist to it yet. So it will say that the releases controller cannot be found. Make sure that it exists as this one. And if we quickly want to just generate the CRUD stuff for this, so the controller, the model, and the views, you can just go into your command line shell, and in here select the right command, which would be controller all. So controller, bake controller all. Actually, if you don't know, you can just type this and it should actually give you the options, which in this case would be releases, because that's what's missing. And if you still don't know what theme to use, you can type -h help, and you can see there is like bake, migrations, and I have the setup thing, which is supposed to add some bootstrap stuff. So I will just try that. So this one. And if I want to, sorry, controller is probably the wrong thing because I want to have everything. So cake, bake, all actually. So I want to have controller, model, view, tests, the whole stack. Oops. And there we go. And if you go now into the repositories file, you will see that it now created a whole stack of files. And there is our releases controller. There is a table, validation rules inside, everything's here. And to check that it's actually working, we just refresh the page. And there we go. So now we have the releases to each of our packages. Most likely those will be actually produced while we release, or we can import them from GitHub or something. For now, we can fake even one by just adding it. Cake was smart enough to see the relation that we have in here. You can see that there's a package ID, and the package ID will automatically be then referred to the packages table. So in our case, it already knows that we want to have some package. So we can select from our existing packages. We can say that we're going to release this version, which has whatever key, doesn't matter. Yeah, and first release my notes. So what did I do? I probably shouldn't have saved something in data, because data in this case is supposed to be an array field. That's a magic field. So my guess is that that doesn't work, but that's fine. We can fix the form later. So in a way, for normal fields, if you don't have any specific data fields, it will just work fine, and validate and save. Based on our schema, actually, the version shouldn't be, the version should be actually verified to exist. So it checks that this version cannot be empty when storing. So that also works. The only thing that currently seems to be problematic is probably the storing of the data. But yeah, that's a different topic now. Good. So this is the CRUD action. When we look into the controller code, we can see that normal pagination occurs for the index action, and otherwise we use basic gets. the add action will create a new empty entity and will patch the entity and save it if possible. Edit will have the existing entity and will patch it and save it. And delete will just delete if it exists. Yeah, so nothing too special here. You can just run something similar in your case as well. And testing should also work. So if you have already a releases table, you can also quickly make some kind of test. So in my case, I can make a find test, and I can do this releases find first from yours, because what we create also is fixtures. And by default, the fixture seems to contain already one entry. So there should already be one demo data. If we debug this, we will see that there should be one. Yeah, so we can go here, we can so PHP, actually, is it, yeah, in this case, model table, what was it? Releases table test. It wants the database log. Okay, that we can fix by not using the database log. Here, that example is for later, and that's why we shouldn't use it for now. What does it want now? And now we have, yep, I think that's the same array problem that we have. It's a great demo. The data should probably be null. The rest should be fine. No? Key, title, data, node. Michael, do you know what could be the issue? Given this normal structure here of watcher, key, title, data, noted, there is a unique index on version. Could that be the issue? That might only work if you actually have a good version to actually add. Possible. Well, in that case, we just use a different, we can use a different test if you want to really show pretty quick how tests look like. We can also do packages table test. There is even one already. So there is a test safe, and we can just copy that into a test find. So, and the same thing, a package is this packages find first. We know that there is also one package demo data as record with lorem ipsum stuff in it. So in this case, we can debug package die. So we can just introspect this one specifically now. So let's use packages table test. There we go. I guess the font of 4.1 on the command line seems a bit of a problem. Maybe Mark Story is listening in and can look into that. So apparently the new fonts don't really work out on the command line. We can also use the old one. So yeah, bit better, I guess. So it works. It returns us an entry. So whenever you write a new method in your model, you can just execute that here. So it can also be like some kind of custom finder method. And then you just assert on it. This assert same. And then you can specify a specific field to be exactly as you want it. What does packages have? We just saw that in the command line. We know that the type should be this, right? So type should be exactly that, if it's true. And then, bam, green. Actually, it's both tests because we also executed the already existing one down here, which is a save operation to test. Yeah. So this is how you can create new controllers, how you can create new tests along with it. And this way you should always develop, because test-driven development is usually way faster. You can already verify that your complete validation rules, everything works. And then the controller is a very basic high-level test. So in the controller, you would really just do very basic stuff. If we go into the branches, packages controller test, then you can see that we here usually only do basic one-liners. Accessing it with get, and then for adding something, I usually make two test cases. I make one that is called add with 200. You can execute that too. Controller packages -- filter test add. So that one is green. And what I usually also do is I'm adding a second one, which is then actually posting data. So I want to make sure that it's actually saved. Data. And you can also make cases, of course, with, for example, validation not working out. So if on the packages side, we're adding something that is required but not given, you can test how that happens, what happens there. If we look into our packages table, let's see. Packages, Struktur. Packages type is required and repository is required and name is required. So repository description and name have to be there. Okay, so, and if that works, it's supposed to be a 301 redirect. So this assert redirect. Yeah, so that's what we expect, because then it's going to the index action or the view action or somewhere. And this itself will, of course, execute both now, test add and add post. And as expected, the add post is failing because those should not be empty. So foobar, my foobar, and foobar. And now it should actually work if everything works out. It doesn't. Then there is another field that is probably required. We could most likely debug the response or the session read. if we just debug the session pretty quick, let's see what's there. We need to retain flash messages true. Nope, it doesn't like it for some reason. To debug that, it's sometimes a bit harder because it's taking the flash messages, so the error messages, and actually already transforming the response, and therefore it's probably consumed. We could probably go into the packages controller, and in here, for the add, we can just see what the package is in this specific case. Maybe that helps to discover what's going on. The type is required, that's why. I probably didn't see that one, or maybe I overlooked it. I might have overlooked it. The type is required. I have used the wrong thing. Type 1, whatever that means, doesn't matter now. And now the entity will not have any errors. And now we can remove this little debug tooling. There we go. Sorry, of course it's another 301, it's a 302. That was my mistake. 301 would be a permanent redirect. It's a normal redirect. So now it all works as expected. Of course, you can also install a debugger, also debug tracing with Xdebug. I think Xdebug currently is deactivated from my computer for performance reasons, because it really slows things down. And also inside of the Raycon, it's harder to then trace because you need to proxy it in. But it's definitely possible to just also use the IDE. Would be a different IDE session to show the stepping through. Would be actually a very valuable thing, but maybe the next time. So yeah, I think this is enough now for the small introduction into test-driven development and just setting up basic things. All of the other, let's say the different application layers, we will get to know anyways now when I start the actual presentation. Are there any other questions so far?
Yeah, we have 3 questions. So the first one was, is it possible to add expand all icons? I guess that was asked during the time you showed the new arrow pages, the missing controller. Yes, I think so. If you want, you can open an issue on the CakePHP repo and we can look at it. Then will tests be included in the next version of the CMS tutorial? I don't know. If someone takes the time, yes.
It always needs someone to do it, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Be the change you want to see in the world. And then we have a very long one from Brandon. I will quickly get the gist. So he asks if Cake could list potential objects in other schemas within the same database. And then he's talking about PostgreSQL, Oracle, MySQL, and so on. From my side, I've never used any of these databases. I'm only using MySQL, so I can't really answer that.
It's probably possible to display.
Yeah, I guess here, Brandon, same thing. If you open an issue on Bake, the whole team can have a look at it. I guess we have some people that use PostgreSQL and other databases. So that might be a good chance to get that feature out.
Okay. Enough of the playing around. Now we can actually dive in. So The IDE helper that I promised to show contains several different aspects. One is annotations. So annotate your code. It's like the doc blocks, but specific annotation lines that help your browser, your IDE, but also tooling like PHP and Psalm to analyze this kind of code. Especially with this little bit of cake magic, like load model and so on, you need to have these annotations in place for your life to be a bit easier. And so we'll do that first, and then we'll talk about code complete and meta file. Yeah. So for this, let's go into the repositories. So you already saw that we created now this releases controller here. I'll close everything else. So, and as you can see, it already has annotations baked in. Yeah. So if you have the latest bake, you will most likely get all of that cool stuff already out of the box. The same for your entities. So if you're in your release entity, you will see all of that out of your box. It's possible that you didn't have the latest version and maybe you're still here on the old time. Yeah? So instead of frozen time, which is recommended because it's immutable, some people might still be using time. And at some point you're upgrading, but you're forgetting the annotations. So the annotations might be outdated. Your title used to be, I don't know, something else. Let's just for fun make int. Yeah, so it could have been something else, and you migrated your code. And if you use it now, your IDE will tell you, hey, this is an integer. You can't use it as a string. So you have to manually fix all that stuff, which can be annoying, and it's supposed to help you. So in this case, what you always want to do is you want to install the IDE helper, which in our case, for time-sensitive reasons, I already did. In the composite.json, as you can see, I already added the IDE helper. In my case, I use devmaster now, but you shouldn't. You should use a stable version. But to be able to test also my latest features on this little demo project, I use devmaster. So if you installed it, if you loaded the plugin as you should in the application PHP, there should be a load plugin call for the IDE helper. IDE helper, where are you? Ah, it's in the Bootstrap CLI, exactly. It's only needed when you actually run command line. So that's why it's in here. And once that is done, you should have a command in here. So if we do cake grep annotations, you can see that there is a annotate command. It's a bit harder to find without the grep. That's why I like to do that. But yeah, here they are. So, and we want to now test the annotate first. So annotate. What I always like to do is verbose output to actually see what it's going to change. And because we are experimenting with it, dry run. Yeah, so in help, you can see all the commands. What do you mean unknown short run? Ah, this new thing, you need to have already selected what you want. So annotate all. We want to all classes, commands, controllers, whatever, helpers. So now I can do this and just see again what is possible. Dry run, you can filter by certain names and so on and so on, but we want to do normal verbose and dry run output. And now you can see that it runs through and it fixes, it would fix this stuff. It doesn't right now, but it would. And the others wouldn't change now. But you can see here for our models, it actually found that the title is not an integer, but a string and fixed that. And the same for the frozen time objects. if we wanted to like we wanted to drill into this specific class, we can also just do cake model annotations, annotate models -f release. So it's a bit faster now because we know what we changed. We changed this specific file, and you can see that it would fix that. And if we now remove the dry run, it will actually have changed that. So let's go into our and it's back to what it was before. Yeah, so the same would happen if you remove something. It would just find it and tell you that it's missing. Instead of updated, it says edit. So same thing. Good. The node should be back now. Yeah, okay, it adds it at the end. So the order doesn't have to be the same. There's a new question now. Suppose the question is, suppose you have code such that it checks if a class is there, isn't there, and asks on that, would IdeHelper hang on such instance when you try to annotate? If a class doesn't exist, it would just ignore that. In verbose output, you get a warning, but it wouldn't hold. No, it's supposed to be like not tripping over stuff all the time. It's supposed to help you. So it will ignore whatever it cannot fix, mainly. What's more interesting is often also relations, for example. So you might have seen that the releases are bound, or they are related to packages. So what you can do is you can do like packages, this releases packages find. So you can work on related tables. And these kind of relations are only existing here because of annotations as well, as you can see up here. So if you add new relations between your models manually, not by bake, yeah, so you have existing stuff and you say, hey, why don't we link those together? And then you would add down here this kind of new relation. Then this one wouldn't exist yet. So you just add this relation. Yeah, but now there will be no such autocomplete here. So you can see that there is, yeah, it's dead. So if you add manually stuff, you always want to run the annotator on this topic. So you want to always annotate. And in my case, we know that it's about the release. So I can just filter by that in the naming. And you can see that it would add, it would add this property back. So if I annotate now the models without dry run, it will give me back this because it just fixed again the missing annotation up here. Yeah. Same for behaviors, same for all kind of magic methods that you want to have access to in your controllers. Okay, so far? Okay, we'll address the unrelated questions later. What's now interesting is apart from all the annotations, which are really useful for methods, for mixins, for properties, is also now the second part, that we had here earlier. Was it IdeHelper? Right here. Code completion and PHP Storm. Yeah. Code completion is basically the old way of doing things. And I think it's supported by most browsers. So if we do generate, it generates this code completion file, which is supposed to be somewhere in temp now. Code completion. So it's basically a mock. It doesn't really exist and it's not used in code. But if your IDE finds it, it will parse it and it will use this kind of data, like those properties, to make them available when you're inside of the controller or the model. Yeah, so there are different ways of making the IDE aware of certain properties in this case. So, but in theory, in our releases table, there could be something available now, like there should be something available on the behaviors. Yeah, see? So now this little tool gives us all of the possible, they don't have to be available, but the possibly available ones, the behaviors to actually access and then get config and so on. So if you loaded the behavior first, it would actually work. Yeah. And this helps also in speed up. Like you just have to quickly select from the list what kind of behavior you want to actually go into now. So, but as you can see, this list is very short and it's very limited. Also, this is the only use case I found, at least, where you can leverage this old school format. There's now a way newer way of doing things, and it's called meta file. So in PHP Storm, at least, it exists as a meta file. And this file you can create from the command line. Before I do that, I can quickly show you one case where it's really useful. So let's bake a new migration. We want to add a field to the releases, which we call status. Yeah, so we make a cake bake. So yeah, what do we want to bake? A migration. So bake migration, and then it will ask me, of course, what's the name? Let's call it release status. So there we go. Now there is a new migration file. And this release status, we're going to just quickly type this. You can already see that here there is no autocomplete here. So and also then when you do table change column, for example, there is no autocomplete here either. You need to know what you want to change. For adding a column, of course, you wouldn't know. So here you would definitely say status integer and possibly this kind of setup and then update. Oops. So this would be a migration that you want to generate, right? Maybe. So if now, I'll show you now the migration. I'll show you now how to generate the meta file. Here, PHP Storm in this case, because it's PHP Storm meta. And you can see here there's also a generate command available. So it says the meta file has been generated. And if I do it again, it will say that it's still up to date. So there wasn't any need for changing anything. I'll show you now the meta file generated. It looks a bit like this. So it contains quite a few definitions. We'll dig into the details later. But now if you use this file, you will see that this would have been way easier, because now we can select from a list. So if we are not talking about a new table, but an existing one that we want to modify, then suddenly you have these things available. You can select the field. If you want to change a column, change column, you can actually select from the list of fields. So most likely in our case, created and modified should actually exist on these lists. Yeah, and then you can change based on that. For adding, of course, there is no autocomplete on this because it cannot know your field, but it would know what types. So here you can now select the possible types that currently migrations and things is understanding. So we can use integer. Ain't that nice? So, and then we can check our migration. Migrations status. As we can see, the release status has not been executed yet. If we execute this, there is now a field in the database. Yeah, if you don't believe me, I'll show you. It was in the releases, correct? Releases. Yeah, status. So a new field has been added with an int2, unsigned. Bam. Now, you might say, hey, this is an integer too. This is maybe not what I wanted. I made a mistake. I actually wanted tiny int or whatever, or small int. Yeah, can be. So in that case, you have the neat way of just rolling back. Roll back. It's the last thing that you did. And now it should actually state again, oh, this one is not executed. And if I restructure this, rerun, it's gone again. So now let's fix this mistake that we did. Instead of integer, maybe you want to use tiny integer. Possible. The length is still 2, because we know that this status will only be 3 values, 1, 2, and 3, whatever that means. So going back to the migrations, we can migrate. And just to see that it's actually migrated, you can prove it's up. And if we go to the database, the field is now here, and it's using tinyint2. So perfect. And what's missing now? I'll show you. So if we go into, let's say, the release view or index, doesn't matter. So here we have the index, and we want to display the status instead of the ID. So I do status here, and here all the fields are available, right? So title, auto-completed, key, auto-completed, version, auto-completed, but status not. Why? What's going on there? So the annotations that I talked earlier about here have not been updated yet. But if you modify your stuff, you should always modify two things. A, the fixture. So release fixture, the first thing that you should do is also updating that one and adding in here the field, because you want to make sure that your tests are operating now with this new field in place. Otherwise, your tests might be green, but your application on production will fail. So this would be the first step to add. And the second would, of course, then be annotate models release. And if I do verbose output, you will see what happens. Bam. So it added the status into the annotations, and now I can you can see that here, status is here. And if I use it anywhere in code now, it's just working. So it's really, really useful to have everything annotated. You can click it. So if you now need to like see the details of that, you can just bam, jump in, yeah, and can modify everything you need to do here. So there is tons of stuff that goes into this direction. That's the direct annotations. So the ones that you can actually see added in here, yeah, and how the how this part helps you. But we want to go back now to the meta file and the different directives that we have. And for that, I will show you the load model command. So when you go into the releases controller, so remember that we did this to find something else. So this chain. What happens if they are not related? So you have a totally different model. Then you would use this load model, right? In order for packages to be directly used. So this load model, and you can also see here it's auto-completed. So all the available tables you can directly select from this list. Plugins and otherwise. So there's a queue job in the queue plugin, but we want to use the packages now. So bam. What happens now? The packages is now available as this packages, but here it doesn't work, right? If you use the return value, packages table, it would actually work. So this would also be an option, because here, thanks to this little tool, it would know that now packages table is returned from this little magic load model call. Fun fact, you could even use packages table. Some people like the class name reference further. It would do the same thing. It would also give you available that. This is usually not used though in load model calls. Most people use the strings, and you wouldn't assign it to a variable. So let's revert that. Yeah. If you have the model aware trait, and if you have packages. So, and if you have then this kind of access, that's already working. The code is fine now, but you cannot click anything and you cannot select custom methods on this. And that's of course not ideal. So again, the IDE helper on the controller in this case would find added a property which is packages table packages. And now it becomes clickable, and it's aware now of this new load model call. And then you can continue doing stuff on this. The same goes for this load. What's the service? We don't use it here, right? In this application. I use it in the sandbox. In the sandbox, you can, for example, what's the service called? Stupid me. You need to import service aware trait. Some people know that. It's from this namespace. It's a plugin that allows to put business logic into a service layer. it's the same thing, like load model calls. If you use it anywhere, no, it's load service, right? Yeah, genau. So with same things here, so you can actually autocomplete on those services, and you can then run the IDE helper and then actually access it directly. Yeah, so it's the same thing, of course, for services. Get mailer. Some people of you like to use mailing. I think you just need to use the mailer aware trait. Yeah, and then you can do this. What was it? Get mailer. Yeah, and then you have all the mailers available that you created. We don't have any yet. So in our case, we could create one. I guess we could bake one. That's my guess. Cake bake mailer. What? Good. Bake mailer. Yeah, what? Let's foobar mailer. Doesn't matter. Okay, so we created a foobar mailer somewhere here. So in order for this to be actually annotated in here, we would need to rerun the oops. Sorry, I jumped around. I wanted to commit this file to see you the diff. Okay. So we want to rerun this. That means PHP storm generate. Dong. It says generated, so there is obviously something different now. And let's see what happened. If we go into the IDE helper, you see the empty getMailer has now a foobar in here. So if I do, now it's there. And even nicer is that the return type is now the foobar mailer. So if you have any specific code in there, could be, like public function custom. Let's just call it custom. Doesn't matter what it does. You can now do foobar mailer custom. So it's auto-completed for you as well. Yes, it returns you the instance that it actually generates. And that always works for both string and FQCN, foobar mailer class. This might be cleaner, as in you can click this better, but it might be slower because you need to really know what you're doing, and you can't select this from a list because there might be a lot of them in this kind of list. So it's hard to do. It depends what you want to do. Yeah. So this is these kind of things. Now that I showed you that, we can also require plugins, for example. So let's require, for example, a complicated package, or at least the name is complicated to be fair. Let's require from ADMAT this plugin, social auth plugin. Yeah, some might know that. It's a namespace vendor, and you will see that in a second. So let's run composer update. It's installing some dependencies of it. Okay, let's generate again the map. And if I go to the div now, you will see that it actually added here the plugin in. So if you have, for example, now in your application, a new add plugin call that you want to add, let's add more here. This add plugin, you don't even need to know exactly how this plugin is spelled. If you know social, it should actually be in the list, which it is. ADMAT, social auth. Most would probably just type this and wonder why it doesn't work. Using autocomplete, you never have to wonder about anything because everything works out of the box. Bam. This is how you load a plugin that does not have the easiest casing in either, because that one wouldn't work. Oops, sorry. With a small d. It has to be really exactly the case. And that's exactly what this provides. So here social doesn't work, social works. It's case sensitive, PHP in this case. You can use tons of more things. I could go into queue specific topics. Do I do any queue stuff? Create job. Actually, I do, yeah. So I have like this little job here, load model, create job. And this is also possible jobs that you can create. So anything in your code that has anything like a string choice or choices of possible strings you can actually have, then you can definitely create something here. In this case, yeah, I think update package was what I wanted. So these are possible. Then what's pretty cool is validation rules in the model. Okay. So in here, for example, the create and modified in here, yeah, is auto-completed. Not for this one, but for require presence. Sorry, not everything yet. So if you have require presence and you want to know which one's available, then there is only 2. Or you don't do anything. But usually you want to have it present on create. So these are pretty cool. Then this one we could do. So someone could make a pull request for the types here, because those are also pretty clear. What kind of types? What I usually refer to is in the bootstrap, the here. You can select from here also a list of types that are available. So that's pretty cool, but we can also, inside of here, someone could make a pull request to actually make this selectable. Even the types, maybe, the names here, because there's only a list full of field names. Behaviors, of course, so all the behaviors are in here. That belongs to the relations, so you can also select all relations already out of the box. We can add a new, has many packages, makes no sense, whatever. Yeah, basically everything. Okay. Later, when we have more time, I can even do a hackathon on an actual use case of mine, where I have bootstrap icons. I'll do that later if we still have time. Let me show you. I think I made a demo page for that. Yeah, so I have these icons here. These are Font Awesome version 5. So, and I do this, I have this helper and it creates all icons. And I always don't know what to pick. And so having a drop-down list is already very cool. And I can show you how this is done with this later. For now, I think we need to progress. I want to just outline a few more things that are new in Cake 4.1. For example, if you have in the controller, for example here, some people do view builder, set helpers, and then an array of helpers, foo, bar. So this doesn't autocomplete at all. If you use a chainable thing though. Oops. Add helper. You can actually auto-select again. So asset compress, I don't know, bake doc block, whatever you want. Format this a bit nicer, and this is already way faster to type than having to manually select from a list that you don't even properly know how to spell. Yeah, so here it's way faster. So these kind of things, you can set the layout. Layout. So all the possible layouts that are currently available. In my case, it's only admin, Ajax, default error. So that kind of stuff is auto-completed. Request env stuff. So I think env should be auto-completed as well. Yeah. HTTP host, for example. Request properties, from what I know, this request get param. Yeah, that's very useful as well. People often use this to check for the extension and stuff. Important here, the underscore. So it's really useful to have the list auto-completed. And one last thing that is very new that I did is, for example, if you're in the templates and you're reusing translations. So let's make a translation. And now you can actually autocomplete even complicated strings, but also like basic stuff like a back button. Yeah? Or if it's a longer version of some here like this, you're way faster than you would ever be able to complete otherwise. And you can use any of your PO files. It would automatically parse, and you would have everything available as a list here to reuse. So even if you don't use translations as only English, you would probably be faster, and the page wouldn't be slower either. I think not much, you can't count it. So maybe it's even worth using if you're just coding in English, because you can reuse stuff. Delete, doom, bam. So that's pretty cool as well. I think that's so far all of the stuff that I want to show. The tutorial and the specific types of meta directives I can do later in this little hackathon, maybe around 9:30 or something, in an hour or so. We'll see if we have time and if you want to see that. Okay, so back to our presentation. Yep, I talked about all that, and that code completion meta file is very specific. Now in this case, PHP Storm related mainly, which makes it productive. And now I want to give everyone a 1, maybe 2-minute break to go to the bathroom. And we start in 2 minutes with a presentation of Michael Kleptrick about the authentication plugins. Oops. While we're waiting, I can answer 1 or 2 questions. There was one question, are these PHP doc annotations? Yes, basically they are part of that specification. And that's why also the IDEs like PHP Storm understand those out of the box. So it's really just normal property method and mix-in annotations. is it possible to describe that arrow all, also the method all, will return package using plugin? Yes, it does that by default if you have the annotation in place. All will usually return you this kind of specific entity or collection of entities. In some cases, depending on how much I chain, I still need to do inline annotations. So we'll have to see how we can improve that later on. Some people want to know what the illuminator is about. So very quickly, the illuminator makes your code more visible by using less magic strings where they can be avoided. So if you have entities and you need to do dynamic stuff on it, like get call and then the entity property string name, the illuminator will just make all of those class constants, and then you can use class constants. So you know where your fields are actually being used, and refactoring would automatically refactor everything inside of the IDE. So many of these tasks actually modify more than just doc blocks. Yeah, so the PHP Storm and the IDE annotator, they are about doc blocks in a way, also semantic stuff. They don't change your code. But this one actually modifies your code. So you can write tasks that are in some way improving your actual code and adding these kind of things in it. Yeah. As for if it helps, if the IDE helper works in VS Code, I don't know. Try it and let me know. Just put it onto the wiki page in the helper and let everyone know if it works or not. It would be valuable to have this information. Good. Then now I'll pass on to Michael.
Right. So, yeah, hello again also from my side. Today I want to give you a quick look into the authentication plugin in CakePHP. It's been around for a few, I think almost a year already. You can find me with my username Klapptrick almost all over the internet, also on Slack if you have some questions. I'm currently living in Munich in Germany and work as a tech lead on our cloud application at Magicplan. And I'm very fortunate that I can use CakePHP every day. So that's quite cool. I started contributing to Cake around fall of 2016, and from the beginning of 2017, I joined the core team. And besides working with PHP, I also really like front-end stuff, so I quite enjoy working with Vue.js, CSS, and overall user interface and user experience design as well. So today we want to talk about some different topics. The first one will be authentication versus authorization. So what's the difference here? Then what is a middleware? The plugin. Then some specifics about the plugin in the implementation called authenticators identifiers. Then I prepared a quick demo for you, and then we can end with some questions and answers. So what's the difference between authentication and authorization? That's something a lot of people often ask. So I think the simplest explanation is that authentication is all about identifying a user. So basically a login. So you provide a username and a password, and then you're authenticated if it's, of course, correct. And authorization is more about what this then logged in user is allowed to do. So you can think of that only admins do have access to a specific resource in your application or a controller. And that's what authorization is all about. But today we will mainly focus on the authentication. We do have so-called first-party CakePHP plugins, first-party meaning that they are under the CakePHP namespace and maintained by the core team. And today we have two of them, authentication and authorization. And these two will be the new way to go starting Cake 5, because the current auth component will be deprecated and removed by then. It's actually already deprecated today, but with Cake 5 it will be gone. As the authentication plugin is based on a middleware, I quickly want to explain what a middleware is. I think the best way to describe a middleware is its layers around your application. So think of an onion. The core, like let's say your controllers, and so that's the app. And everything around there in layers could be different middlewares. So on the small graphic here, you could see that starting from the outside, the first middleware we would hit a CORS middleware that takes care of all the pre-flight checks and setting and or responding the correct headers. Then there is the assets middleware, for example. So the asset middleware basically responds with a static file you have set in your web root, for example, a CSS file, and it doesn't even hit your application at all. And then, for example, there's also the routes. And that's quite handy. It lets you basically agnostic from your application. It lets you change the request and response properties on the way, and all layers behind that have access to the change stuff. You could also return quick early, let's call it, in the request, like with the assets middleware. So this also brings some performance improvements. And in Cake, we already use quite a lot of middlewares out of the box. One of them is the so-called body parsing middleware. This one is used to mutate all the request data, so you can access it with this request get data. So even if you have a JSON sent to your controller action, you can access it with the same method. So that's quite nice. And another example would be the cookie encryption middleware. This basically takes care that some specific cookies you configured are completely encrypted, and the user can't decrypt them, of course. And behind this middleware, the cookie gets decrypted, and your application can actually work with the raw data. And when the request gets out again, the response is sent out again, it will be encrypted again. So this is quite handy as well. Another cool thing about middlewares are that if they follow the PSRs 7 or 15, you can use them with Cake. So it's completely framework agnostic. If you find a cool middleware, for example, there's a great CORS middleware, which has nothing to do with Cake at all, it still works in Cake. So you can just use it. So this is quite handy. So you can share a lot of code with different applications. The Cake authentication middleware is also implemented as a middleware, plugin, sorry, is also implemented as a middleware following the PSR 15 standard. And I think the greatest achievement, at least for me, was that you now have very early identity access in the request cycle. So think about in Cake 3 in the beginning, when this plugin wasn't out yet, you could only access the current user if you either hack into the session or you have to wait until you hit a controller. And now you can basically already know which user is authenticated against your app very early in the request, and you can work with that stuff, and that's really, really nice. Another awesome feature, in my opinion, is that you can apply these this authentication middlewares on different route scopes. So that helps you, for example, to provide different authentication systems based if you want to authenticate against an API, so a stateless authentication, or if you want a normal user name and password authentication for different parts of your application. The plugin supports various ways, such as form, so username and password, session. So when you come back with a session cookie, you don't have to re-authenticate. A cookie authenticator, which is used like as a remember me cookie, token, JWT authentication for APIs, and so on and so forth. If what we offer in the plugin is not to your need, or let's say you have different use cases, it's super simple to write your custom code to authenticate against various backends, such as SAML or so. This is actually a piece of Cake. The plugin is supported in Cake 3 and 4. So if you're still using Cake 3, you can easily also use it in your application. And as I said earlier, the authentication plugin will replace the authentication part of the auth component in Cake version 5. Okay, so let's talk about the fundamentals of this plugin. And the first part is the so-called authenticator. The authenticator basically takes the incoming request and extract data you want to authenticate against. So this could either be form data, which you posted in a login form, an authentication header, and so on. And these authenticators basically take this data and pass it on to the identifiers, which we'll talk about in a minute. Out of the box, we support the session cookies, the form authentication, username and password, the token, JWT, and some more basic stuff, HTTP basic digits. And we also have the remember me cookies. Once an authenticator has found some usable data, it will pass this on to the identifiers. And the identifiers are using this data to find some identity, for example, a user in your database. They're doing that with the help of a resolver, and the resolver that comes out of the box is the ORM. So it will basically run a simple query against your database and sees if it can find something. And also there we have some built in. One is the password one, so it will look up a hashed password in the database and returns the user entity. The tokens, JWT subjects. So if you are working with a JWT token, you can look up the subject. It's normally SUB called. And for example, in the JWT, you could have stored the user ID, and that would then look it up in the database. You can also talk to external sources, like with LDAP. So in this case, the username and the password, the identifier would send it to an LDAP backend and would return the result of the authentication. And then there's also the callback identifier, and this is basically, a callback. So you can provide return true, and the authentication would work all the time. Good. I prepared some code, so I want to show you that. Okay, so this application is based on the app template you can find on the CakePHP/app. I made some minor adjustments. And to give you a quick scope, what we have. So we have only one controller, the users controller, where you can add, view, edit, and delete users. And we have one REST API endpoint where you can fetch the user record. So here we have a normal login form, and it's already filled out, and we have a remember me cookie. So you normally submit it, you get a bad request, okay. I waited way too long. This page is open for a long time. So this is the CRSF token that probably now got in my way. So let's try it again. And now we logged in. The cool thing is the remember me cookie was now set. You can see it here. And so let's test if it actually works. So let me delete the session cookie. I refresh the page, and we are still logged in, and we just got a new session cookie. So the other use case is the API. So normally you would think now, okay, I'm already authenticated. I have my session token. So that wouldn't be a stateless authentication. But I'm not logged in. So let's actually add an authorization header to the request. I provided my authorization token as foobar. So I refreshed the page, and now I'm also authenticated against this endpoint, and I returned my user entity. Okay, so how is this all done? First, you install the plugin via Composer. So Composer require CakePHP authentication. Next, you load the plugin in your Bootstrap method in your application PHP. And then you have two options. So the middleware queue you set up in the application is run against all routes. So basically every middleware you set up here is valid for the whole application. And this can, in our use case, can be a problem, because if you would set up the authentication plugin here with token and session authentication, we would have a weird mix between stateful and stateless authentication. But as I said earlier, for the API, we want a stateless authentication, and for everything else, we want a stateful authentication. So actually, we are not going to set it up here. What we set up here, though, was the encrypted cookie middleware I called earlier, and I configured it that it encrypts the remember me cookie using the cookie key I provided in the app PHP for configurations. Okay, so how do you set up a middleware that is only valid for some parts of your application? In this case, we have a feature called scoped routes. So what I did here is, that's the routes.php file. I added 2 route scopes. We have one called API, and we have the default one. The one in the API, it creates a new authentication service. That's basically the fundamental base of the plugin. And it offers some methods to add authenticators and identifiers. So in this case, as this is the API scope, we only want a token authenticator, and for the header value has to be authorization, the header key, sorry. After that, we load an identifier. This is also a token identifier. So what this identifier will do, it will look up the token value, the value of the authorization header, and look it up in the ORM. The way I did it in the database, I simply added a token field to my users table. And in there is the same token. I just passed on with this browser plugin, and that's the way I was authenticated. And all of that happens here only happens if my route is actually in the API scope. For my normal application, which lives outside of the API scope, I set up it a little bit differently. So we are using 3 authenticators, and they actually run in order. So the first thing I check is the cookie authenticator. So if the client sends a valid remember me cookie, he's already logged in. Perfect. The next one is the session authenticator. And that basically checks the session cookie, looks it up in your session storage, either the database or the PHP temp file, and then logs you in. The session authenticator by default does not make a lookup in the database. It basically trusts that in the duration of the session, it's still valid. You can force it to make a database lookup though. And the last authenticator we have is the form. That's basically the one that extracts the username and the password. And then we load our only identifier in this case, and this is the password. And that then the form authenticator passes on the data to it. Good. The login actions are actually also pretty simple to implement. So that was the view I showed you earlier. So this one. You basically don't have to check anything here, like if data is sent and so on, because once again, the middleware was already passed through way earlier than the controller action was actually created. So you can simply get the result. And if it's valid, you can redirect your user. And if it's not valid, you can show him a flash message. And it will just tell you invalid username or password. And for the logout, it's even simpler. You just destroy, or you log out the user, and this basically in the background destroys the session, deletes the remember me cookie, and redirects the user to the login page. In your app controller, if you load the new authentication component, it will automatically block all actions. It will automatically block the access to all actions when an identity is not present in the request, which is quite unfortunate if this is the login action. So as with the old auth component, you can actually whitelist some specific actions. And in this case, in my user controller, I allowed unauthenticated access to the login action. So in this way, a user that is not logged in can still access the login action. Yeah, for the API, I created also an app controller, which does not extend from the app controller. So it extends from the normal Cake controller. And in here, I do another check. I basically check again if I get a result from the authentication. And if this is not valid in this case, I simply return some JSON response with a message bad credentials. A small thing that has changed now compared to the IdeHelper. So when you log in, you actually have this logout button, and if you're logged out, it's not there anymore. The way you could implement something like that is that in your view file, you can use the new identity helper. This also comes with the authentication plugin, and it has some methods to check the current identity, and one of them is logged in. So if the user is logged in, you can show the logout link, else don't do it. Good. That brings me to the Q&A. So do you have any questions? And I will open Zoom again somehow. Okay, does the authenticator support MFA? Okay, I don't know what MFA means. Jim, can you specify? Or a multi-factor authentication, I guess. Not out of the box, but you could certainly build something. Yeah, shouldn't be hard. Does CakePHP 4 offer Active Directory LDAP authentication out of the box or via plugin? I had to roll my own into X. Yes, we have an LDAP authenticator and identifier, so it should work out of the box. All right, okay, then thank you. And if you have any more questions, as I said, you can reach me on the CakePHP Slack at Skleptrick. Yeah, give the authentication plugin a try. I think it's really great. And definitely makes the life easier for us developers. Then back to Mark. If he's still here, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm here. I didn't expect you to finish that soon. You still have like 10 minutes on your clock if you want to further address some people there.
Yeah, sure. If there are more questions, I still have some time, so shoot ahead.
It's a bit hard to tell which of those Q&As are now for me or for you. But based on the timeline, some of them might be mine.
Okay, so Andrel, how is the login action configured to redirect not login users? Is it possible to with an array? I think so, yeah. It should support the router. So the way you do that, I have to reshare my screen, I guess. Yeah, so the way you do this, you simply pass the unauthenticated redirect and it will redirects you to the login page. And if you set a query param, it also includes the requested resource, which is quite nice. So as an example, let's try to access the user's add page. I'm currently not authenticated, so it redirects me to the login page, but it applies this query parameter user's add. So if I now log in, I'm already on the add action, which is quite handy. With the authentication plugin, will it work with the CakeDC users plugin? I don't know. I've never used the users plugin so far. Is it possible to use the authentication plugin with a controller component? Yes, there is the authentication component. So you can also do some stuff there, allow action, deny actions, and so on and so forth. Yeah, the authentication plugin I just showed you, it works the same way in Cake 3. So it's pretty similar. Can there be another webinar on the authorization plugin too? Yeah, why not? Currently, I'm not using all of the plugin. I'm just using the request authorization middleware, I guess it's called, because we have like a custom auth setup, which we ported since Cake 1 days. It's basically a small row-based system, which works with a small configuration file, which roles can access which actions. And so far we ported it for every major version, and yeah, it still works. So I haven't really looked deeply into request policy, into policies and all of that stuff. Is there a way to whitelist controller actions based upon routes, e.g. whitelist all controllers actions with an admin prefix? I can right now only think about a very explicit way to list all your actions. But in general, I think you can hack around this easily and do something that you allow more than one action also without being very specific. Okay, Brandon, I don't know what an ARO system is.
Access role objects.
Yeah.
This arrow echo. But what the system is, yeah, that's, I don't know.
I mean, the plugin we wrote it's super simple. It's, yeah, as I said, it basically just whitelists controller or specific actions for different roles, which we just store in the database. And then there's also the option to configure public actions, so like login. And that basically just hooks into the auth component or now in the request middleware. So it's like one central point, but it's not fancy at all, but it's super simple and it does the job.
So you want me to take back over?
Yep. Okay, I think on that note, I will also leave you now. Everyone, thank you very much for joining. It was amazing to see such high participation numbers. Really means a lot to me that, I mean, the CakePHP community always seems to be a little bit quiet, but I know that there are still a lot of people out there working with Cake for many years. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's now my 5th year working with Cake every day, and I'm still super happy and I don't see any reason to switch to anything else. So thanks for joining again and have a nice evening.
So back to me. So we actually had planned at least 1 or 2 more lightning talks, including the Fixture Factories. But it seems like right now I cannot add more people to the panel list. So the ones that would like to speak currently cannot speak, it looks like. Oh, wait, maybe I can do that. Allow. John?
Yeah.
Ah, you can speak. Can you also, let me see if I can put you into the panel list. Okay, so are you able to share your screen?
Yeah. Can you
Cool.
can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. Greetings from Berlin. How is the sound? Is the sound okay?
Yeah, the sound is good, but we don't see anything just yet.
Okay, wait.
Maybe I need to stop my screen share.
Yeah. If you stop your screen share.
Okay. And then go ahead. And let's give everyone 1 minute if they want to go to the bathroom pretty quick before we start your talk about the Fixture Factories.
Yeah, I actually have to. Thanks.
And once this talk is over, we can cycle back to the coding hacking session. And I can show what I wanted to show earlier. There are still panel questions open. I would like to add with one or two more while Joanne is still away. I'm doing that, by the way, typing right now, so you can also submit your questions there.
I'm back, so anytime.
Let me see if anyone wrote something in the chat. Some people are still stuck with Cake 1. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Luckily, I left my last Cake application, version 2, a few weeks ago, and I will never look back. It's just so different to work in 3 or 4 because it's IDE supported. Like you can really work in the IDE, and it's just so much more. It's so easy to work with it. Yeah, so.
Mark?
Yeah.
Can you see my presentation screen right now?
Yes, you may start now.
And if I move to PHP Storm, can you see it? Or is there something?
Nope, I think it's only one screen probably. Like
Okay.
you probably need to just switch it out. Like me, I have to always, yeah, exactly, disable one and activate the other one.
Okay, good to know. Then I'll start with the presentation then. Good evening, everyone. Here I'm Juan Pablo. I'm talking from Berlin, a few streets away actually from Mark. And I'm going to present a tool that we've developed in our company because we had issues with writing tests and more specifically writing fixtures. So Mark did a presentation before, we saw a bit of the fixtures. There's something already built in by Cake, which is working, but in our case, it was getting a little bit messy, having these big fixtures and writing more, and at the end, you don't know what's in your test database because all the test features get loaded when you load one particular model. So to start, we're going to talk about tests, about testing. So imagine you have a method foo that you want to test. You first write a scenario. For example, you're going to populate your database, say with an article having 2 authors, and you're going to test your method. For example, delete that article, and you check that that article has been deleted and that the authors remain, for example. So as I said before, one problem we had is that the fixtures are hard-coded. So you go in your fixtures and you create one new entity and a second one and a third one. And at some point, you come up with huge fixtures that you may not have an over anymore. Also, when you write your tests, you have to declare the fixtures that you're going to use. So if you have an entity that has many associations, and which you're not actually always aware of, you have to add that new fixture, and that costed us some time. And yeah, as I said, the bigger your application, the bigger your fixtures, and you always have to switch between your code in the test and what's actually in the fixtures. So a solution we came with is a class that generates entity with the associations. I'll show examples right after. With your business logic on the fly, so when you write your test, you see exactly what's in your test database. You produce the fixtures really on the fly, so you have full control of the test features that you use in your test. So this is what our factory looks like. Take an article factory, for example. It's a small class that extends the base factory, which is provided by the vendor that we present here. And the only thing you do is to define to which table this factory is going to create entities. So I'll show you an example. This is a small example from a test. So you want to write a test, and what you do is for that test you need to create an article. So you use your article factory, which is an extension of the base factory that the vendor provides, called make, which is going to initiate the factory, and then get entity. So your article is produced, and you can run your action, your test on that article and check what you expected. So that's an I'll go on with some more examples. You have the possibility to create 2 articles. So now you have created 2 articles in your database, in your test database. Persist, different than before get entity. Persist is going to save it in the database. And then again, test what you want with these articles and assert what you want. I'm going to switch to PHP Storm to show you how this can be made simply. So this is an example of wait, I'll get us to the right PHP Storm. This one. So I have a basic test, and I create here my article, just as I showed in the presentation, get my entity, and I assert that the created article is an instance of article entities. And this way I have populated my test database with that article. So the article factory is not found, it doesn't exist. I'm going to bake it. I'm starting from scratch. So in my commander, once you have installed that, that plugin, if you run the bake command, you have here the possibility to bake Fixture Factories. So I'm going to try that. If I type bake Fixture Factories, in the small test app I have 5 tables. I have articles, and they can have authors. The authors can have addresses, and the addresses have cities, and the cities have countries. So the command offers me to bake factories for one of these, or for all. I'm going to, if I do help, you can see what's possible. So you can force the writing. You can write factories for all your models, or your 5 models. You can have an option methods. I get back to this. It will bake an extended factory. The plugin, of course, as usual in Cake. So if I bake all my factories, I'll put force, but here it's empty, so it's not really needed. It's going to create me 5. Oh, it's created. So I will shift back to PHP Storm. So now if I look in my factory, I have 5 new factories that have been created. I get into, for example, the article factory. It has created a class which extends the base factory. I provide the table that is concerned. So the plugin notation also works here. If it was a table that is in a plugin, you put plugin dot the name of the table. There's also in the skeleton the default template. I'll get back to it, but at least now we have a factory that is available. So when I run my tests, it passes successfully. So article factory is initiated, and we get an entity. I'm going to try the method persist. because now we want to have that article to be saved in our test database. And if I run it, it doesn't work. Oops. It doesn't work because my article have a required field, which is the title. Like it's in the database, it's a constraint. So what I do, I go in the article factory, and in the set default template, well, at least I have two possibilities. Either we do it manually. I'm going to set the title to foo. So now that it has a title, it can persist. It's going to work. And this is now saved in the test database, and I can go on with my test and work on that article further. Or what I can also do is leave it empty. And in the set default data here, you are going to enter the default values that are inserted in your entity per default. So here I'm going to create a title, and with the use the help of Faker. Some you might know, but it's a class that it's a vendor that enables the faking of data. So I'm going to create per default a title of the length 20, let's say, and this works too. So now whenever I create an article, I don't have to care about setting the title. It's already set per default, and it's going to generate something randomly. Okay, so as I was saying in the beginning of the presentation, the asset of this is that you really, going back to the presentation, you really get what you see in your test. You don't have to use the fixtures anymore, the PHP fixtures. It's actually, we pass them by. I'll show later how you can configure your PHP unit XML to do so. But when you start your test, you produce just what you want to use to consume in your test. And it can go, it can be more complex, so you can create 2 articles on the fly. What you can also do is use the with method that is native to the vendor, to the package. So for example, my article has an association called authors, and I can on the fly create 2 authors associated to the article that I am creating. Persist, and my database is populated. What I can also do is on the fly assign a biography to each author. So I'm creating there 10 articles with 2 authors each, and each author is going to have a biography. If I have a biography field in my table that is filled with the Faker, you could give it something static, or you use Faker. That's why this is thanks to this being a callable. You call Faker and generate any random real text. And after that, you have your set of data that is persisted in your test database, and you can go on with your test, delete it, whatever you want to do. And the nice thing about it is that your factory is yours, so you can really add methods. So for example, you could add a method that's called publish, which is going to set the, well, this is not a native, but you can write your own method called publish. That's going to set the field published to true, for example, or have a method that creates authors on the fly, or do this or do that. So the example here is very basic. We were confronted with a more complex project, but this way you can recreate quickly, intuitively, and with the auto-completion your set of data that you are consuming in the database. Yes, so that's it basically. This is an example of a factory that's a little bit more complex. So we have the same as previously. You assign articles. So the factory knows that it's create entities for that table. We have our default field, just as I said before. Per default, we apply the method with authors. The method with authors being that we create n authors, per default one, associated to that article. And you can add this and you can add that too. I'm going to switch back because that with thing is very useful. I'm going to switch back to the commander and I'm going to add the -n for method option. I'm going to overwrite all the factories I had done previously and show you how it looks like now. If I'm back in my article factory, yeah, it's been overwritten. And the bake command is going to look for all the associations that are defined for that article table. If I look at it, article table associated to bills, which is in a plugin, but that is also handled. So you can buy articles, that's why you have bills and you have some authors. So it has many, belongs to many. So automatically, the method option in the baking is going to add that with bills method and populate it. And the same with author, automatically you have these methods that are on hand. So it's, I mean, at the beginning, if you want to learn how to use that tool, it's very handy to use the -m option, even later. And as I said, if you write here, if you want to write more methods, you can really carve your factory at the need of your business and write tests pretty quickly. To install it, while I'm in PHP Storm, it's simple. You have to change the listeners. We have some native listeners in the vendor, which are going to work slightly differently than how Cake works. I'll detail that in a moment. And of course, load the plugin in your application.php. That's basically it. So you just have to composer require the vendor, change the listeners, and load the plugin. Then you're ready to write tests really quickly. It's good for small apps. It's particularly good for large apps. So that's the package. The package proposes a class to generate entities with their associations and with homemade methods, the needs of depending on your business need. We provide a fixture manager and injector, which simply truncates the dirty tables between each test. That's what it does, which is already what the CakePHP fixture does. But you don't have to declare anything. You don't have to say which fixtures you need to insert, to inject. And the fixtures that you don't need are not generated, which is now the case with Cake. And there's the bake command to help you create your factories. So this is the vendor. You can just have a look at Fixture Factories --help. It will guide you through. So I think pretty intuitive, and yeah, it can help you to, when someone sees a test, when you see a test that you've written a while ago, you see exactly which database, which data you've inserted in your database. You don't have surprises on associations that were created in the fixtures that you might have not foreseen. But on top, above everything, you can write tests really quickly. that's it for me. That is, yeah, that's the compo, the package. Work from Nicolas Masson and myself working at P Projects. Thanks to Michael Bartos, who gave us the time and the freedom to develop that tool. And we're really happy to share it because it has changed. It has massively changed the way we wrote tests, and we write tests more happily. We can much more focus on the test itself, on testing the method we're testing, and creating the database around is it's become really intuitive, and you don't have to think much more about the fixtures. If you have any questions, if you want me to go back into the code to explain something, feel free to ask.
There is one question in the Q&A panel.
Yeah.
Do you see it? No, you don't, right?
No, I don't.
In the Q&A section.
Yeah.
Implementing the add this and add that methods in the factory will generate the data, question mark, or where does the data come from?
The data comes from persist. When you persist, it says you initiate your factory. At this and at that could be, for example, set the title to that value, or I don't know, you have to think of broader concepts. It will not persist. The only thing it will do, it will manipulate the way the factory will generate the entity or entities in the end. It won't save anything. The only method that saves is persist. And you don't have to persist. You can also say, I'm happy with having an entity. I don't want to save it. Why not? And you can use get entity or get entities. I hope that answers the question.
Good. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
And with that, we are going to yield back.
Okay, well, thank you very much for listening, and feel free to post questions. See you later.
So back to the lightning talks now. There is one more person coming up. Let's see if I can.
Hi, Mark. Yeah.
Raphael, you can hear me, right?
Yeah, sure. All good.
Cool. You want to share your screen?
Yeah. Just a sec. Okay. Let's check. Wow, it's, you see my screen?
Yeah, well, no, we see you.
Okay. Yeah. Hi guys, my name is Rafael. I'm from Brazil and talk from Brazil, Recife. I work for CakePHP, I guess 8 months ago, and work with CakePHP almost 10 years. Well, I don't expect talking, but I see the Meetup, and this week I need to write a post about DP test. It's very relevant, I think, because people talk about fixture, and I will show one plugin can use it instead of the fixtures. Yeah, just give me a second for run the project. Okay, check the sample. Okay. Let's check here.
So to give everyone some context, he will do a talk also on testing, but not specifically now fixtures, right? Also not these kind of fixtures that we just did, but a little bit different approach.
Yeah. Creating this test here, fixture, fixture. Okay, and I will remove the PHP.
Should this be products fixture, plural?
Yeah, let me check. Okay, I need to fix the connection. Scale.
I think the schema, your fixture is singular. Is that on purpose?
Yeah.
Because usually the fixtures are the same as table name, so plural. Maybe you have a different setting, I'm not sure. Yeah, see, the name should be plural.
Table. Maybe that's fixtures, yeah.
Yeah, but your fixture name, your class name is singular, so it will not find the fixture.
Oh, yeah. So, oh, sorry. Yeah, perfect.
Easily overlooked when you have a lot of stress and quickly making a example work. I found my issue, by the way, why my test before didn't work. I used the word key in a database table, but a key is a reserved keyword. So without quote identifiers, true, it just blew up all the time as an SQL error. So I found that problem on my side.
I guess it's a fixture here. That's a fixture. Almost. Factory application tests. Okay, let's oh, perfect. Then another talk about this test is okay, and talk about fixture. And I have one schema here, very simple. It's a products table. Let me show for you. You see tests. Sample. Products. So that's it. We have a product with names, look, price, description, created, modified, and I wrote some tests. Products table test, which I try save. I found 11, and I try duplicate them. I found SR because the goal of the test is test if that slug is unique. Yeah, and I have products fixed here. I have one. I found SR, and in controller I do the same thing, just testing about the requests integration test. Here it's about the model table, Yeah, that's the useful. That's the they generate this code for us. But sometimes it's very hard keeping many fixtures like Juan talk about the plugin for generate existing one project. It's a DB test. You can check the test PHP. The goal of the project is generate a dump of your project, and the fixtures will come from this dump. So in this case, I will come for here, and I will create the iPhone SR, alright. Okay, oh, that's a problem. But let me try again. Wow, I don't know what's happened about.
Is that the Cake 4 version?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, you should use 4.05 or latest dev master. 4.06 is still problematic here. You would need to completely clear your browser cookie cache. Otherwise, then it should also work.
Okay, but let's consider we have this data in the database, okay, and we will have here and okay, we already installed the beta test and we can generate the database. But first I need add the data template in Bootstrap. Sorry, that's template. Okay. Okay. Okay, I need the unit to remove it. Let me check. Okay, and let me remove the fixture. Okay. Okay. Remove here, and let's run the tests. Okay. Okay, I need to generate the big tests. Maybe there it's wrong, the driver. Let me check. Yeah. That's sample. That's template. Okay. They will generate the dump of that database, yeah, with that data. And now when you run the tests will come from here. It's not coming from fixtures. That's the goal. So the advantage is speed. We can very fast have fixtures. We can reproduce production environment for testings. And I guess that's it. We have a post about that. You can check. I will put in the chat. I guess it's the test. Let me check. That's it. Which I talk about how to create the project, create the schema products, generate migration. I wrote the tests. After that, I installed the DB tests and generate the dump. Well, I guess that's it. Sorry, the mess, because I don't expect that. But I want to share with you about the solution. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions in the panel? If you're interested, we can now have Georges talk about the API plugin pretty quick. So there's one more lightning talk before I go into the demo session. For that, I need to find you to talk.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. You see my screen correctly? Well, this is Jorge Gonzalez from CakeDC. It's nice to see you around. Sorry not being here before. I had some errands around, but I'm happy to be here again. So really quick here, I'm going to create a new project. Let me create a new project. Let's call it test, right? Doesn't matter at this point. I'm going to show you real quick how to set up a quick API for your project if you have an existing project, and if you really need a quick API that you can use to access your project with a couple useful features built in. It's very easy to set up and fairly easy to configure and very powerful. I'm going to show you a couple things here in a bit. So I'm setting up a new project. This is a CakePHP 4. I'm going to test, which is a regular CakePHP project. I'm going to bake it. Just to have the models. This is a test database I'm going to use. Well, doesn't matter. It's just a bunch of tables, and we don't need to get into details with it. Any database will work for this real quick demo. I'm going to then compose or require PHP, KPC, PHP API. And when we get the CakePHP API, the CakeDC CakePHP API plugin, which is this one, let me show you here. API plugin. There it is. So this is a little plugin that hooks into your application as a middleware, taking control of the routing and also authentication through CakeDC users. You can define authentication through rules to cover the endpoints and services that you have defined. It will allow you to configure services and hook those services with some routing, but that's kind of advanced. What I want to show you today is a very easy install and how it looks like. So once you have the plugin installed, you need to bin cake plugin load users and API. Once you have the plugin loaded, you can basically do, well, you need to copy the basic permissions as stated here in the documentation. Let me copy the command here on the installation, because you have some basic permissions that you need to use on your application, which is basically this file. No, not this file. Permissions, configuration, Where is the file? Oh, I mean, I'm going to navigate the file, no problem. So you need to copy vendor, KDC, CakePHP API, and then from inside config, you have API permissions into config API permissions, PHP. So once you get this done, you can then curl. Oh, let me start test server, right? Like this one. So, well, now you can basically open it, and if we go to here, now you can go to curl HTTP. Well, this is the URL. Here, you can go and curl URL API, and then games, for example, and you get a games. So as you can see, let me make this bigger and bigger, bigger. So what the API provides is an API scope that is hooked into the routes of your application. I'm using games because this is one of the tables I have in my default database that I'm using as an example. So you can do games here, and you basically what you get is the result with the status, the data, with all the games you have in the database. Well, it's a paginated result. You have pagination out of the box. You have some links with the actions provided. You have a way to define scoped routes. For example, you can go to games, in this case, as we have ID2, we could go to games 2 and get the second game, which is this one, right? Then for the second game, each game has moves, so we can navigate to the moves. In this case, we would be getting the moves of the game with the specific ID 2. So as you can see, well, we are actually providing CRUD features on top of your project with the API plugin. And with a minor configuration, you will get basically a very powerful out-of-the-box integration using this plugin, which will save you a lot of work if you are just looking for a simple API to pull some of your data out from the database in your existing CakePHP project. Hope you enjoyed. It was quick. Any questions?
So far, no panel questions yet. Is everyone still awake, by the way? It looks like there's 53 people. There's one hand raising. Yes, okay, cool. so they are still awake, but they don't have any questions, it seems.
Okay,
cool.
Okay, good.
Only feedback in the chat is awesome. That was very clear and helpful. Cool. Nice. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So, do we need a break or can we continue? We took longer, like way longer now than expected. There was one more small talk in between that was very spontaneous. And so we're a little bit over time, but I think we just make it a bit shorter now for the rest of the parts and then we'll be fine. It's for some it's working time. For me, it's not working time, it's free time. But yeah, okay, cool. Then, no, not yet. Let's dive into one specific case of mine. You can see my main screen, right? The coding session. Yeah, good. All right. I need to rearrange my desktop pretty quick, if it's possible at all. No, no. So I wanted to show you. This is so annoying. How can I get rid of this because I can't click where I want to click. Ah, now, okay. So we talked earlier about my little demo here and the address book with the icon. And so I have to add quite a few icons all over the place. And for that, I have a helper, which is the format helper. Let's see if we dig into the demo page here. So we can see here, there is the method called icon, and then you can pass it any font awesome name, a class name, and then it will just add it as an icon here. So this is my little thing. Now, if I want to add something else, let's say, because I'm lazy, I'm going to copy the first part. So if I want to copy another icon, I have no clue what I actually need. Like it's hard to remember those always, right? So for this, I thought, hey, why not making autocomplete here as well? It shouldn't be too hard. So extracting all the possible class names Font Awesome currently has, and just doing that. So for this, font icon format helper. Ah, there we go. So for this, I created a format icon task. Sorry, yeah, pretty quick. The recording will be posted in the channel and probably also be sent around for all the participants. So don't worry, you'll get the recording. So now to my form helper task. I already created a dummy task, and this one is supposed to collect all the class names and put them into the same IDE meta file that we currently already use for all the other stuff. And here I'm gonna just use, depending on what version you're using, also what font awesome version, you can use different stuff. I thought, hey, let's look into this. Is it called? Yeah, it's called Solid. Looking into this, it's pretty clear that you can extract all the IDs and you should have all the possible class names. So I did that. I created a file handle. I'm importing this file content. And then I'm using a regular expression to find all the class names, or in this case, it's IDs, but yeah. So basically all the names that match a symbol in Font Awesome. That's what I'm importing. I'm merging them with the existing configuration that I might have. I explain that later. And in the end, I'm just returning all the icons. So it's a collection of strings. And now all we need to do is basically assemble it in a way. So for that, I'm gonna call icons is this collect. Oh, I should probably type this collect icons, which gives us this list. And then we need to probably iterate over it. So for each icons as icon, we need to return a base directive. So any form of directive works. And one second. So. Yeah, we need to create first a list of icons that have the right value name, because if we print a list like override, no, I think it's expected arguments, right? Expected, yeah, here, something like this. If you want to print out a list like this, we need to have the right kind of escaping in place. And I will explain that in a second, but we'll just make some kind of list. And for this, we will assign now each icon. And here we can use different approaches. We can do it very manually, which is basically using this. So this would be the easy way, in a way, because it's literal. Like this will be printed out. So you will have in the end one normal kind of character here at the end. If you want to make a bit more reading, you can choose one of the available, I think it's called string name. Yeah. So it's value objects, and they know how to behave when printing. So the create, this one will automatically add this when printing. There's also a literal name, and there are a few others as well. Class name, for example, which automatically adds the fully qualified class name into the output. So for now, this would probably be fine. Yeah. So the list now exists of strings, and then we just have to, in the end, make a directive out of it. So what's the method name that we want to do? I think it's static class format helper class. The method name was icon. So this is the method we want to annotate, fully qualified. We just use the format helper here. We could also manually write the string. And then we create the directive, which is a new expected arguments. At this point, I'm just going to explain what they are. Expected arguments means you expect an argument at a specific position. So in our case, we expect at the first position a string. So expected arguments is here the perfect thing. You can also use return values or override. Override is what we use at the very beginning when we do load model calls and stuff like that, where we want to have input and override the existing output. Yeah, so instead of an interface, we want to have the concrete class. In our case, the expected arguments is fine. And it takes a method and a position. So the method we already know. The position we just saw, it's the first position, which in coding is a 0. It's a 0-based position. And then we assign it the list. I say list because the keys are not relevant. We could also just use that. But I usually like to use icon because is it sorted already? Did we sort? Yeah. Okay, we sorted already, so it doesn't matter. But sometimes if you get unsorted stuff, you want to do a key sort so that it's alphabetically sorted. Yeah, like this. We don't need that now. And then we have the directive, and we just need to make that into the final result array. For that, we can use the shortcut key to get the right key. Also to keep the order alphabetically here. And the directive is the value. That's it. So this overall, getting some kind of list and just forming it pretty quick into this directive should give us the output we need. The only thing we now need to do is basically add the new format icon task into the configuration for the IdeHelper. So it's part of the tasks. And here we can just go to, where's the IdeHelper? There. Oh, I already added it in. Okay, so apparently it's already there. I did the work before, I guess. Usually you wouldn't have that and you would just add it here. But now it should actually work. So let's run this generate. What? No, 29. What did I do wrong? Oh, yeah, that's bad. This should be inside of the string. Okay, why didn't the IDE tell me? Very strange. Now, yep. Now it got generated, And the diff shows us, interesting, a new type came from the plugin from SocialAuth. Where, there they are. Expected arguments, format helper icon, on the 0 position, all those. So for example, this nice little ambulance. Yeah, so if you don't know how to spell ambulance, you don't need to know anymore. You can just use that. Let's use ambulance because it's cool. So here, bam, all the icons available. And here's the ambulance. We can also make another one. Oops, wanted to use that. And here we can select something from the very end. We just know it's something with a set. So let's see. Yin and yang. Okay, that's cool. And then say cool. And here we say ambulance. So just so you see the pictures with the text. Okay, and now we can see those, I think, hopefully, showing up. Yo, there we go. Yeah, this is one very small practical use case where inside of your own plugins and application, you can make such improvements and from there on be way, way quicker in actually working with that. Now, one further thing for this specific task of the format helper, sometimes you don't want to call them like this, or I think there is even is there something like right? Yeah, arrow right. Yeah, so go here, right? So let's see if that works. Yeah, arrow right, go here. Now the arrow right represents the literal symbol, what it actually represents as a symbol, but it doesn't represent the semantic meaning. So in your case, you might want to use a different semantic meaning. So you say next, yeah? So you want to say next here actually. And I don't think that's available as icon yet. No. In that case, we can even assign this in the format. There should be something like this. 1 second. Yeah, exactly. We just make a little format. Oops. And then we assign font icons. And next could be assigned to our, what was it? Arrow right. So that would be also something that could be quite useful to actually use a different way of aliasing them. Let's see if that works for now. Yeah, that also works. But it's not auto-completed. Next is not auto-completed. But now if we just run it again, because as we saw earlier, it pulls also some of the configuration from the configuration of the helper. It should now have, maybe the cache needs to be refreshed. We'll see. We can look into the IDE Meetup if there's a next in there. Yeah, there is. Right? Yeah, there's a next. That's the icons. Or wait, that's the translations. That's interesting. That's the translations. They are not yet in there. Okay, I need to figure out why it doesn't pull in those. Maybe I didn't merge them correctly in the tasks, because here it should get the configured keys and merge them. Anyway, that's something specifically now to the task to figure that out. But in the end, whenever you add something, you rerun this little snippet this code, and you will have the icons or whatever it is you need to autocomplete available as a list. Yeah. Okay, any questions to that? You can also return the icon instead, of course, whatever you need. If you want to create such a function, autocomplete would work on that just as well. So find something cool and try it out to actually add this task. There is the core plugin available, which is this one. And then there is the extra plugin available, which is this. Everything that is like core related usually goes in here. Everything that is plugin related goes into the plugins. So you can have something, currently there's something for migrations built in. The Q plugin has something built in and so on that goes into the specific plugin. And if it's not possible to put in a plugin, then you can also just pull request it to the extra. And here you can have it directly pulled as an optional dependency. So in here we have, for example, right now, I added two. One is this task, which is Font Awesome version 5. And there's also a Font version 4 task. In Font Awesome version 4, the icons are a bit different. That's why there are two different tasks for this. Yeah. So you can feel free to add more. What I wanted to show earlier also was the 4.1 version of actually using URL array. So before, I'll refer that pretty quick. Oops. So before, you had to use always the whole array everywhere. And this is fine if you just have an action to change. But if you need to add the plugin, the prefix, the controller, and the action, so all four, this can become quite tedious here in like the array declaration. And you have the option in 4.1 to use a shortcut now, which is called URL array. And here you can pass any IdeHelper generated string. So if you ran the IdeHelper, you will have complete autocomplete on all the possible actions in your code. So if you click here, you can see that it already finds me all the controllers and actions I currently have. So I could easily link to some kind of backend action. Boom, done. So this is pretty useful if you want to use some kind of basic routing. And the second argument, you can add all kinds of options to it. So if you have query strings or whatever, that's a different topic. But you have autocomplete now on this first part. Yeah? So it's optional, you don't have to use it. But in this case, it's probably easier, especially if you're inside of plugins and work a lot with longer arrays. Yeah, so in the Q plugin, I can show you PHP. There must be something, right? Index maybe? So here, let's go, yeah. The controller actions can be several things, and especially if you want to link back. So if you want to here link back to non-plugin, you always need to say plugin false. Oops. So plugin false. Also sometimes even admin as a prefix false. Yeah, so this can become really annoying. If you use the new system URL array and you link to something like the branches that we just did before, it will automatically do the other ones to false. So it's way faster either way. Yeah, you can use it anywhere. You can use it in the view. In the view, you will even have some more sugar. So instead of just using, there was a link. Yeah, instead of just using this little trick to display the same as you display up here, you can also directly use link from path and on the URL helper, URL from path. So a build from path. So that's also possible. There are some questions. Why are you passing the URL array in the example I was showing? Well, you can pass it anywhere there where an URL array is expected. So this expects an URL array, or primarily this one as well. So you can also, without the referrer, would still work. It's just not a referrer anymore. But you can pass it anywhere that you have a URL. It builds it from this very quick string that you have auto-completed, that you can just browse through and click, boom, done. Yeah. Okay, there are some more questions. Can we get an introduction into building a plugin from scratch? Maybe in the next seminar. Yeah, based on our time that we're already running now 3 hours, I think these things will go into the next session. I will note them down and make sure that we'll have ideas for our next setup. Next meetup. You can, if you want, in the chat now, you can add more ideas of things that you want to see, and I will just collect them and write them down as well. Yeah, building a plugin definitely is very interesting. Yes, when we post the webinar recording, we will outline the timestamps for those things. We can go now into a Q&A session. I'm not sure, is it possible for you guys to actually speak? I think I can make you, I can open it up for specific persons. So if someone has a question now he wants to, or like some discussion he wants to have, I can do that once you actually type something into the chat. Are there anyone that wants to like talk or something, or ask a question in real life? Is there anything interesting in the IdeHelper that I didn't explain yet? No, I think I covered everything. Okay, I see more about authentication. There are more questions open. Maybe even authorization next time. That's definitely true. Okay, I'll note that down. Still, if someone wants to speak, I can make them speak. I don't have to talk all evening long. Okay. Sure. George, do you want to say something? So in general, what I showed today, so for my part at least, it's all about making one more productive and making sure that everything is annotated, automatically type hinted, auto-completed as much as possible. Yeah, so if there's still some kind of stuff that needs to be done manually, that's not so cool. So we want to really drill down on that to make it really nicely usable throughout the whole code base. You're back.
Mark, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I have two things to say. First thing is thank you for the for the session today, and thank you for being around in the chat every day, helping a lot of people. That's really good that you're doing here. The second thing, I have something else that's kind of nerdy. I don't know if it's late and people want to see this or not. It's just something I was working on and upgraded recently to Cake 4. It's still in a branch. I don't know if you are familiar with the React PHP and PHP PM projects.
Well, people, raise your hands if you want to see some nerdy cool stuff. You have this cool, oh, look, there's 5, 7. Okay, yeah, I think that's plenty of people. Awesome, okay.
Let me share.
Yes, go ahead.
Sharing again. You cannot share, sorry.
Oh, I have to stop sharing? Okay. No, you can.
Okay. Good. So I'm back here. Yeah. So this project, React PHP. I think you could be aware of this one. I don't know if you are or not. This is well, basically an event loop developed in PHP, providing very fast response times and response times near or close to typical Node.js applications, which is usually very fast, like 2 or 3 milliseconds per API call. And let me share the screen and the screen here. So this is the project. These guys are doing a fantastic job on implementing a lot of the protocols and non-blocking access to streams and the file system and Redis databases or Redis data sources in this case, and they also have a project Ratchet, and Ratchet server is also built on top of this one, the WebSocket server, and they have this one, PHP PM, which is a project to basically replace, in a way, PHP FPM. So imagine that you have an Nginx or Apache front-end server and you want to serve PHP. A way to serve PHP would be setting up PHP FPM, right? Which is a very common configuration nowadays. And another way to serve PHP would be using PHP PM. This project here is basically a process manager a way to manage a number of workers serving PHP code. And there is actually, this project actually has a couple bridges for popular frameworks like CakePHP. And we have this one here, basically allowing you to bridge an entire CakePHP application with PHP PM. How these all works. the idea behind the bridge is that you can actually bypass the overhead of building the entire framework on every request, which is time consuming. So following the bridge, if you take a look at the bridge code, there's also a Cake4 branch that I was updating a couple hours ago. And the point here is, if you look at the code and how it works, the bridge, it's only one class, by the way. You go here and take a look at how that works. You see here, you basically bootstrap a CakePHP application once. You create the application class once, you call the bootstrap once, etc. And then you generate an application server that is ready to handle requests at this point. And then handling a request will basically run through all the middlewares that are defined in your application, build a response, and send a response back. So why is this important? Because performance is very different while running this kind of projects, and setup is also more or less quick. You can basically composer require the plugin that is CakePHP ppm. Copy that from here. PC this and the Cake4, and it will download dependencies from React and React PHP and all the related packages and stuff like that. And once you have it here, you actually have a PHP server that you can run this way. You have, for example, a way to execute the server in debug mode and max performance. If you execute it on max performance is like production mode, right? For production mode, you usually will pick twice the number of CPUs that you have available. So your CPU is also working certain PHP requests. For development, you can just run it this way, running it this way. Oh, this is actually a problem. Well, you need to have PC NTL extensions, and I think I have it on my PHP 7.2 setup. A second. I have one of these. Well, I have 7.2 actually. I think, okay, that works. This PCNTL is a PHP extension to handle threads through PHP connected with the system threads or the operating system threads in a way that those threads can be soft and not impacting the performance. And this is a low-level implementation of the thread. And once you enable that PCNTL, which is a requirement, you can basically run the project this way. So you can see you will have only one worker at this time. So, well, basically you can run it using curl again. It's now serving in 8080. So, well, it is exploding because if you run it this way, you need to also remember that you need to set up your full base application. But what I wanted to show you is you actually don't need to go through the API. If you run the server again and get it, you will be able to basically serve PHP through PHP PM. And this is going to be super fast, especially if you have one API endpoint that is relying on some Redis or cache engine that you have already. I'm getting like 2 or 3 milliseconds per request. and this thing is capable of handling a huge amount of load per node. So that's something that will be helpful if you're dealing with a lot of traffic for endpoints that are not very heavy in the backend. And when the time of loading the entire stack is going to be huge compared with the time of the processing of the payload, then an alternative like this one is going to be very, very, very helpful, because you will see like 10 plus or 100 plus response times. Okay. That's, again, kind of nerdy, but could be useful in some situations. That's it. Any questions? Yeah, that was my point as well. Yeah, Cake 3 is integrated much better than Cake 4. That is unstable. Everything is unstable right now, but PHP-PM is pretty stable, and CakePHP as well. So I guess the bridge is going to be stable at some point as well. And yeah, it's much faster, much faster. It depends a lot on your use cases, but it could be 10 or 20 times actually. And again, response times are like 2, 3, 7 milliseconds on endpoints with caching, which is close to what Node.js is providing. So pretty happy with it.
Can you see the Q&A panel? I made you a co-host.
Oh.
You should be able to see them.
Let me go there. Yep, see that. Production ready. No, it's not production ready. That's the short answer. Sorry for that. But again, the bridge is very simple code, and I've been using this in production for Cake 3, like for more than a year, at least 6 months, and it is pretty stable. Again, this is like any regular service that you install in production. You will need something like Monet or systemd or some other daemon that is looking to your service to keep it alive and restart it when needed. You need to be very careful with this kind of services because this is a long-term PHP process, so it will have memory leaks. So you need to ensure that you reset or reload your workers from time to time. But you have a lot of workers, so you can actually define a policy to restart some of them alternatively, so you keep the memory leaks under control. And it is fast as hell, so I would give it a try. The one from Patrick. Yep. Any other questions regarding this last thing? Patrick, I'm using API platform for my JavaScript apps. Cake for them too. API platform. Yeah, go ahead, Mark. I don't know what you mean about it. Oh, it's already answered. Okay.
You can post the link to your projects in the channel, as in the chat, that everyone can like click on it and they can like play with that later or whatever.
Sure, sure. This one here. Here, for example. Yep. Well, you will have references to, to both projects. You have the links there. And then for the PHP-PM, it's this one, which is very interesting. At the same time, I was wondering how would it look like to create a link or to create a layer on top of CakePHP to take advantage of the other non-blocking APIs that React PHP provides. For example, non-blocking Redis or non-blocking streams. For example, to, I don't know, to manipulate images or uploads, or well, a lot of other things that we usually do on the backend. But that's something to explore. I've been playing with the streams a lot for managing streams of medical files being sent. And again, it's like a totally different performance level based on the blocking APIs we are used to. So I would totally recommend to go that path if you're looking for performance. Look, this isn't an Nginx replacement. Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah. Performances on everyday applications. It depends on the time versus, I mean, it depends a lot on the time of the framework bootstrap versus the time that you actually do work on your application. If you're dealing with a regular application where the queries are not optimized, or you're not caching, or you're just doing slow things, then because of the time you spend actually doing things versus booting or bootstrapping the framework is very, very huge, you will not notice any difference at all. But as you close to that time, that could be milliseconds, where the entire framework, the CakePHP stack, is bootstrapped, and all these configurations files are loaded, and routing is processed, and cache populated, and stuff like that. If you're close to that time, then you will get a huge difference, because you will bootstrap your application once and maybe serve 1,000 requests or 100,000 requests in that worker before that worker is restarted. So that's going to be the main difference, that you pay bootstrap time once versus every request.
Okay, and the two last questions in the Q&A, and I think then probably we can close this.
Okay, Joy, how much do you have to change our existing CakePHP apps? I think both can coexist. I mean, you could have a non-blocking based small API that deals with your streams, or very fast Redis access, etc. And then you can take advantage of the framework and the powerful ORM to do your everyday stuff. So both things could happen at the same time. Blocking API versus non-blocking. Well, and I'm sorry, maybe this could be confusing. When I'm referring to blocking versus non-blocking, I'm really talking about the event loop. Everything in a React PHP application happens inside of an event loop, and calls to, for example, Redis are non-blocking. So you send a request to read something from a Redis endpoint, and you are not waiting till the results are back from Redis. So you can actually yield that call and wait and keep going on your event loop. And when that call comes back from Redis, then you continue working on your logic. It's very similar to other event loops developed for other languages, right? Hope that answers the question. Okay.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much for this little introduction into a topic that we probably don't dive in every day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. I think at this point now, with 3.5 hours, it's quite the marathon actually. We can conclude this meetup. We have 33 people left from, I don't know, what was the most people today? 100? Did we reach that? I didn't pay attention to the numbers all the time. But yeah, definitely a lot of people joined today. Thank you very much for that. And we definitely have some topics for the next session, and maybe we can do that more often the next few weeks if everyone else wants to join in as well. Cool. Have a great evening or morning or wherever you are. And see you soon. Bye-bye.